My name is Ethan Graves. I'm 50 years old and I used to be a Marine. These days I sleep under a tarp behind a church on 8th Street, just a block from where people sip overpriced coffee and pretend not to see me. I've learned that you don't fall all at once. You slip bit by bit, decision by decision, until one day you realize there's nothing left to hold on to. I served 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. I led men into places you can't even imagine, and I brought most of them home. Not all, but most. Back then I had a name people respected. Sergeant Graves. Strong, sharp, reliable. Now I'm just another ghost in a worn jacket, someone people look past like a smudge on the sidewalk. I didn't come back broken, not at first. It crept in slowly. The anger, the noise that never left my head, the feeling that I couldn't breathe, even when I was standing outside in the middle of winter. I tried everything. Appointments, group therapy, medication. My wife left my son, stopped calling, and every job I picked up I lost. I was too quiet, too intense. To something. It's a strange thing to go from giving orders to asking for socks, from protecting others to hoping no one spits on you when they walk by. But I'm still here. I still wake up each morning and take a deep breath before stepping into another day. Part of me thinks maybe there's a reason I haven't given up yet. Maybe there's something I'm supposed to find, or maybe someone's still looking for me. Whatever it is, I have this feeling my story isn't over yet. And if you're listening, neither is yours. When I first stepped off that transport plane, I thought the hardest part was behind me. The sand was gone, the gunfire was gone, and the only thing waiting was home. But nobody tells you how different everything feels when the world you left behind keeps spinning without you. At first it was little things. I couldn't sleep through the night. I'd flinch at loud noises or get locked up in silence when someone raised their voice. I told myself it was normal, just a phase. I was a Marine after all. We push through. But pushing through didn't help when I woke up, drenched in sweat, gripping the side of the bed like it was a ledge. My wife tried to understand. She really did. But there's only so much fear and distance a marriage can take before it starts to split. One morning she sat across from me at the kitchen table and said she didn't recognize me anymore. Part of me didn't either. After she left, I threw myself into work. Security jobs, construction, a short contract with a logistics firm. Nothing stuck. I'd get hired on a Friday and let go by the next payday. Too intense. Too angry. One guy told me I was scaring the clients just by standing still. I laughed, but inside I was unraveling. The VA gave me pills and pamphlets. I took the pills. I read the pamphlets. But none of it stopped the static in my head or the rage that boiled up from nowhere. Some days I felt like I was watching myself from outside my own body, like I was operating on a delay. I stopped answering my phone, stopped going to the gym, stopped shaving. That's how it goes, I guess. You stop doing one thing, then another, then another. I tried living in my car for a while. I parked behind grocery stores, rested at rest stops, and hoped nobody would knock on the window. That worked until the engine gave out and I couldn't afford to fix it. I watched them tow it away like they were pulling the last piece of me into the void. I remember standing there with my hands in my pockets, wondering where the hell I was supposed to go next. There's a kind of loneliness that eats at you when you're still surrounded by people. When you're on a crowded street but no one sees you. I learned to make myself smaller, to sleep lightly, to disappear into places where no one would ask questions. I wasn't using drugs. I wasn't drinking. I was just broken in a way no one could see on the outside. Some people thought I was lazy. Others thought I was dangerous. But the truth is, I was just tired. Tired of being strong. Tired of surviving. Tired of pretending I was okay when I hadn't been okay in years. That's when I realized I hadn't fallen off the edge. I had been pushed, and I didn't know if I had the strength to climb back up. I walked into the shelter on a Wednesday afternoon. It was cold, raining lightly, and my socks were soaked through. I didn't expect much, maybe a sandwich, a cot if they had one open, and a few hours indoors without someone telling me to move along. That's usually how these places go. Get in. Don't cause trouble. Get out. There was a woman at the intake desk, early 30s, brown hair pulled tight in a bun, eyes tired but kind. She was flipping through papers when she looked up and smiled. Then she said something that made the air freeze around me. Gavin Cross. I blinked. I thought maybe she was talking to someone behind me. But when I looked back, there was no one else in line. I turned to her again and said my name slowly, like maybe she didn't hear it right the first time. Ethan Graves, Marine Corps. Last 4 of my social, if she needed it. She hesitated, then looked back down at her file. Her face shifted just a little, like someone trying to decide whether to say something or pretend nothing happened. She pulled out a manila envelope and handed it to me without saying anything more. There was a post-it on the front that read, "For immediate review, identity confirmed." My hands were wet and shaking as I opened it. The first thing I saw was a photo. My face. A little younger, cleaner shaven in a uniform I didn't recognize. Not a Marine issue. And underneath the photo, the name Gavin M. Cross. Date of birth matched mine. Blood type. Eye color. But the place of birth said Fort Macon, Tennessee. I was born in Syracuse. At least I always thought I was. I felt something twist deep in my chest, like the ground beneath me had shifted. I wanted to believe it was a clerical error, some other guy who just looked like me. But the picture there was no denying it. That was my face. I asked her where the file came from. She said it had been mailed directly to the shelter 3 days ago. No return address, just a government tracking code and a sealed cover. She hadn't opened it until that morning. Said she almost didn't show it to me at all. I stood there for what felt like forever, the envelope in my lap hands still trembling. My mind is racing through every possibility. Was this a mistake, some kind of scam, or worse, something from my past I wasn't supposed to remember? The woman leaned in and whispered like she wasn't sure she should even be talking to me. She said the name Gavin Cross was flagged in the intake system. It triggered a hold notice from a federal database, the kind they use for missing persons or special protection cases. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just nodded and stood up, clutching the folder like it might vanish if I let go. As I walked away from the desk, I noticed a small note tucked in behind the photo. Handwritten. Just 3 words. "We found you." That's when I knew something was very, very wrong. I wasn't just a man down on his luck anymore. I was someone the government had been watching. Or maybe someone they had lost. Either way, I was about to find out who Gavin Cross really was, and why he looked exactly like me. I waited until nightfall to go through the folder again. I found a corner in the back stairwell of the shelter where no one would bother me. The air smelled like dust and bleach, and the single bulb overhead flickered every few minutes. I opened the envelope carefully, like it might explode if I tore it too fast. Inside were several sheets of paper and a set of old photographs. The first photo was of me, maybe mid-30s, standing in front of a chopper that didn't look like anything I'd seen during my tours. I wasn't wearing a Marine uniform. The insignia on the chest patch didn't belong to any branch I knew. The boots, the gear, even the way I was standing, it all felt off, like a version of me that someone else had built. The first page listed a full name, Gavin Michael Cross, clearance level 7. Operation Affiliation Sentinel Gene Project. That phrase hit me like a punch. I had never heard of it before, but the way it was printed in bold stamp like something out of a top-secret dossier, it carried weight. Something deep in my gut turned cold. I kept reading. Date of enlistment, 1993. But that made no sense. In 1993, I was in high school. I was playing football and working weekends with my uncle fixing motorcycles. Yet there, in black and white, was a detailed record of training completed at Fort Macon, Tennessee. That place didn't even exist on any map I remembered. The file went on to mention medical evaluations, neuroadaptive testing, and something called genetic compliance scoring. I didn't know what any of it meant, but every word made my skin crawl. I flipped to another document and found a psychological report. It described a subject who showed heightened resilience, quick recovery from trauma, and near-perfect memory retention under stress. The description felt like reading someone else's obituary, but every sentence pointed to me. It said the subject had undergone memory suppression and identity reassignment. That phrase made my breath hitch. Identity reassignment. Like I'd been edited. In the middle of the stack was a sealed photograph envelope labeled LAVEL3 INTERNALAUSEONLY. My hands were sweating when I tore it open. Inside were more images. Me in a lab coat seated in a white room. I connected to wires, eyes closed like I was asleep or unconscious. Me with a shaved head, a number stenciled on my temple. I didn't remember any of it, but it was me. Same scar above the eyebrow, same jawline, same eyes. I sat there staring at the photos, trying to make sense of a life I'd never lived. How do you question your own memories? How do you trust anything you remember if something like this could be true? The shelter hallway felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. I could hear my heart beating in my ears, louder than the hum of the light. There was a memo at the bottom of the stack. Just 2 lines. Subject Gavin Cross to be monitored indefinitely. Last confirmed contact code Blacksite Echo. That's when I knew this wasn't a mix-up. This wasn't identity theft or bureaucratic error. Someone had built a life for me, or maybe overwritten one. And now for some reason, that life was leaking back through the cracks. I didn't know who Gavin Cross was, but I was starting to wonder if Ethan Graves ever really existed at all. I met Felix behind the soup line. He had that look you only see in men who've seen too much and made it out with just enough sanity to know what it cost. His coat was Army-issued Vietnam era by the color, and his hands shook slightly when he lit his cigarette. He watched me for a long time before saying anything, then nodded toward the empty bench like we were about to talk about something that shouldn't be overheard. He said he'd seen my file once. Not mine exactly, but something like it. Back when he did off-book security for a lab near Quantico. Said the project was called Sentinel. Not a regular, something deep black with private funding and federal teeth. They weren't recruiting soldiers. They were making them. The way he said it made my chest tighten. He said the program didn't start at boot camp. It started in orphanages. Group homes. Kids with no families, no paper trails. They were tested young, trained, quietly broken and rebuilt before they ever saw a uniform. He looked me square in the eye and asked if I remembered my childhood. Really remembered it. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to laugh it off. But the truth hit harder than I expected. My earliest memory was a birthday. I think I was 7. Everything before that was a blur. Faces with no names. Rooms that didn't belong to anyone. Dreams that felt more like someone else's flashbacks. Felix leaned closer and said, "Sometimes the program wipes memories clean, implants false ones." He'd heard of men waking up years later thinking they were someone else entirely. They gave them new lives, new IDs, sometimes new families, but the skills stayed buried underneath waiting. He told me I had the look, the way I stood, the way I scanned a room without knowing it. He said if I really wanted answers, I'd have to stop digging through my past and start questioning who gave it to me. Then he stood, flicked his cigarette into the street and said one last thing before he walked away. "They don't lose people like you by accident. If they let you go, it's because they're done with you, or because they need you to do something you haven't done yet." It was just past midnight when I noticed the van, parked half a block from the shelter windows, tinted darker than legal engines still warm. At first I figured it was someone crashing for the night, but when the passenger door opened and a man stepped out, my gut clenched. He moved like someone trained not to be noticed. But I noticed. He walked straight toward me like he knew my name, like he'd been waiting. Mid-50s, clean-shaven glasses, wearing a jacket that looked government but not official. He said my name before I could ask his. Both names, actually. Ethan Graves. Gavin Cross. His voice was calm, but his eyes never stopped scanning. He said he was a medical advisor once, contracted to work on memory sequencing for the Sentinel Gene Project. He told me he'd seen me before. Not just seen monitored, logged reactions, adjusted protocols. He handed me a small hard drive and told me to watch it somewhere private. Then he looked over his shoulder and said I had less time than I thought. Inside the van, I plugged the drive into the screen on the dashboard. The video was grainy but clear enough. A younger version of me sat restrained in a white medical chair. Electrodes on my temples, tubes in both arms. I didn't flinch, didn't speak, just stared straight ahead while voices in the background discussed memory reprogramming response conditioning, something about alpha phase triggers. I watched myself lose pieces of who I was. The man said the founder of the project, General Carlton Hayes, had gone rogue. He was tying up loose ends. I was the last. Not because I was dangerous, but because I remembered too much. Hayes couldn't afford that. The doctor leaned in close and said if I didn't disappear, I'd vanish anyway. And no one would even ask what happened to me. He got back in the van and drove off like we'd never spoken. I stood alone under the flickering streetlight, heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was being hunted. I stopped waiting to be found. The moment that drive confirmed what I was, who had made me, I knew the next move had to be mine. The soldier in me, the part buried under years of trauma and cold pavement, woke up like it had just been sleeping, not gone. I spent a week watching the outer perimeter of a defense consulting firm in Arlington. It was a clean front, but behind it sat the operational core of Hayes' network. The same men who had erased my life walked in and out every day like nothing was wrong. No security badge, no paper trail, but the patterns were all there. I watched. I mapped. I waited. The first breach was simple. One camera rerouted. One keypad reprogrammed with an old frequency trick I learned in Kandahar. I was inside before midnight. Hallways gleamed under fluorescent lights. Every footstep had to be calculated. I didn't need to take anyone down, not yet. I needed proof. Something I could put in the right hands or blow wide open if it came to that. I found a room labeled Archive Echo. The door was biometric, but the sensor still recognized the code name Cross. The lock clicked like it had been waiting for me. Inside were rows of black servers humming like they were hiding something alive. I pulled the main access drive and connected the decryptor I had scavenged from a contact 2 cities back. The files flooded the screen. Subject logs, experiment footage, internal memos. Everything Felix hinted at, everything the man in the van had warned me about, it was all there. Dozens of names, children, grown men. Even a protocol for erasing military records to cover recruitment from public institutions. The project wasn't just real. It was still active. I backed up everything to 3 encrypted drives and planted a timed relay in the server room. If I didn't manually cancel the signal by dawn, the data would leak to every news outlet with a defense beat. Fail-safe insurance. No more running. No more hiding. I walked into Carlton Hayes' office before sunrise. He wasn't surprised. Said he knew I'd come. That I was always the most stable product they ever produced. Product. That word hit me like a round to the chest. He offered me reinstatement, a quiet life, off-grid, funded and protected. Said I'd earned it. I told him the only thing I'd earned was the right to end this. I left him there, with a clock ticking on everything he built. When the sun came up, the first wave of leaks hit the wire. Photos, reports, names. Faces of people who had been ghosts until that moment. By noon, congressional hearings had been called. Hayes vanished. I disappeared again too. But this time it wasn't to hide. It was to let the world remember me as the man who brought the truth back from the dead. One last mission. No backup. No medals. Just justice. The footage dropped at 8:17 a.m. sharp. Every major network ran it within the hour. It wasn't just a leak. It was a controlled strike. Years of buried programs, encrypted transcripts and classified footage played out in living rooms across the country like a war crime documentary no one had consented to see. At the Pentagon, they scrambled. At the Hill, they panicked. Carlton Hayes didn't show up to his briefing. His name was suddenly on every list no one wanted to be on. He disappeared without a trace, and not even his shadow showed up in the news cycle again. Just silence. The kind that comes after something breaks and can't be fixed. I was watching from a rooftop across the city, coffee in hand, backpack by my feet. I'd already mailed 3 packages, one to a journalist I trusted, one to a lawyer I never met, and one to a child I never knew I had. Each envelope had part of the truth, each addressed with care. I didn't need credit. I just needed closure. At exactly 11:47 p.m. I left my wallet on a bench near the river. Inside it were dog tags, a handwritten letter, and a passport with the name Ethan Graves. No money. No ID beyond that. Just enough for someone to think the man who owned it had given up, or worse, stepped into the water and didn't come back out. The letter was short. It said I was sorry, that I remembered everything, that I didn't want revenge, only truth. It said the real me had died a long time ago in a lab with no windows and no name. The rest was survival. I walked east until the city lights faded behind me. Every step felt lighter, like I was walking out of a uniform I didn't remember putting on. No one followed. No one called out. I wasn't anyone anymore. Not Ethan. Not Gavin. just someone who had done one last right thing before disappearing. I found an old bus station just before dawn, bought a ticket to a town I picked at random, sat by the window and watched the sky turn blue. That's when I realized something strange. I wasn't scared anymore. Not of being found. Not to forget. Not of starting over. I died that night. Not in the way people talk about in the papers. There was no body, no headline, no funeral. But the man who'd been hunted, shaped, used, erased, he was gone. And what was left was something new. Something free. I go by a different name now. Nothing fancy. Just something that blends in and doesn't ask questions when spoken out loud. I work the night shift at a small hardware store in a quiet town where people still wave at strangers. It's not much, but it's mine. Every Thursday, I visit the local shelter, not for food or a bed, but to talk. Sometimes to listen. A lot of the vets there don't say much at first, but they recognize something in my eyes, and I see it in theirs too. We've all come back from somewhere we can't quite explain. I help where I can. A ride to the V, a pair of boots. Sometimes just a hand on a shoulder so someone remembers they're still here. It's not redemption, but maybe it's something close. Most nights, I walk home slowly, letting the cold air settle over me. I think about everything that's happened, the people lost, the lives rewritten. And I wonder quietly, not in fear, but with curiosity. How many of us are out here living lives that were never really ours to begin with?